Thank you very much, Liz. That was an enlightening presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's now time for our first panel of the afternoon session. So this is all about electrification and EVs, and it's a panel that I'm chairing. So I'd like to welcome the other panelists onto the stage. So I'm going to try and stay at the lectern for a bit, but I may end up sitting down if I start to get tired, because obviously standing up's quite a chore. But what we'll do first of all is go around the panel, brief introductions. We've already heard from Liz just now, so I will pass over to Dom.
Good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, my name is Dom Gibbison. I'm a partner at PA Consulting. And one of the main reasons I'm here today is that I'm leading PA's work with OZEV as part of the support body on the Levi Fund. And I guess I'd describe the Levi Fund as the sort of younger sibling of the Rapid Fund. So rather than aimed at motorways and service stations, Levi is aimed at providing local charging solutions, so primarily low-powered, and it's aimed at people who do not have access to off-street parking. So people who live in flats, people who live in terraced houses, what are the local charging solutions? So this fund is, as you may have seen, if you know anything about Levi, it's a government fund that is going to be distributed to local authorities who are responsible for developing the charging network at a local level. It's quite a lot of money. It's not quite as much money as the Rapid Fund, but I think the announcements recently came out that they're looking to distribute around £350 million across the Tier 1 local authorities. And part of our job as the support body is to work with those local authorities in terms of developing their capability, in terms of developing their schemes, and ultimately getting some fundable solutions that the government is happy to put money in to go alongside, hopefully, some significant amounts of private sector investment. And ultimately, Levi's got sort of two big aims. One, it's about expediting and getting that quicker rollout of local infrastructure charging that we need. But it's also about creating a more sustainable charging market. So how do we get to the place where actually we don't need the government intervention? Actually, these markets will be self-sustaining. It's probably worth maybe just starting with a sort of few of our priorities, and hopefully this will sort of lead into some of the debate and the sort of conversation that we go into in a few moments' time. But sort of in the run-up to sort of thinking about this, there are so many places to go on this that I think sort of coming out with 2 or 3 priorities is probably quite challenging. But anyway, I think firstly for me, there's something around equity. So this isn't just about getting local kit and infrastructure. And if you think about it just as an infrastructure challenge, I don't think we're going to get this right. It has to be around how do we get the right infrastructure to the right people at the right time. I think my slight fear is at some point in sort of 5 to 10 years' time, or maybe even sooner, somebody mentions the word postcode lottery. And I think if that happens, we maybe haven't done as good a job as we need to. So we've got to make sure that we're getting the infrastructure out there, as well as getting the right customer experience associated with it. So that's certainly a sort of big priority. I think second priority, if we want to go quick, there's something around the capability at local authorities, and I know we've got representation today from one of the local authorities, and some of them are doing an amazing job and are really sort of driving out local EV charging solutions. But there are others that need to catch up, and I think going back to the equity point, it's how do we get those other local authorities moving quicker. And the final thought, just to sort of this introductory section, is just around the sort of commercial forms. So lots of different local authorities have undertaken many different types of commercial approaches. So from sort of owning and operating the kit themselves through to sort of more outsourced sort of concession type contracts. But it's still relatively immature in terms of a lot of the contractual forms, and a lot of local authorities are going through quite long procurement exercises in terms of developing those commercial forms. So the sooner we can get to a much more sort of standard heads of terms, I think the quicker we can move the market. So hopefully some opening thoughts to throw into the mix as we move on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dom. And yeah, postcode lottery is something that I've heard quite mentioned quite a lot. So yeah, hopefully that stops in a couple of years. So next, I'll pass over to Jake for a quick introduction. Jake.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can all hear me okay. So my name's Jake Goldby. I am the head of acquisition at Osprey Charging. Osprey Charging are a fully funded, private equity-backed charge point operator, one of the leading ones in the UK. Our primary focus is around the deployment of specifically rapid charging infrastructure. And again, we'll sort of flesh that out over the course of this conversation. What our sort of primary goal is over the next sort of 12, 18 months is to really meet that demand profile, which we're seeing is hit chronic levels in the UK at the moment. We're very aware of, amongst many in the market, particularly our peers, that we are not necessarily meeting that demand at the moment as it stands. And again, just to sort of cite Liz, we need to have that sort of collaborative approach in going forward to ensure we can really open up this market, but not creating the Wild West, which I think has been punted around in the media over the last few months and weeks and months. So I think, one thing that I sort of want to get away from today, sort of get away out of today, if you like, is really understanding where those challenges are coming from in each of the different segments or key stakeholders which are involved in this market. I think it's all well and good sitting from a sort of CPO background and saying, these are the challenges which we're facing, these are the issues which are present. Actually, that may well be not as straightforward for all the other key stakeholders in this market. And again, I want to sort of flesh that out over the course of today. I just wanted to sort of rattle around this. Osprey are explicitly focused around the DC charging realms. Now, that's not to say that we discount or ignore the necessity for AC chargers. There's a polarization in this market and there's a demand from each side. One will complement the other and there will be a mild mid-ground, but ultimately there's a necessity to bring everything together to have that sort of single source solution that can be rolled out across the UK so that we can have a collaborative and sort of equality-backed network rollout. So I think, appreciate you're probably not glutton for punishment. I won't bore you to death with any more of my background. So I'll probably hand over to Paul, if that's okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Paul Gambrell. I have a long job title coming up. Zero Emission Vehicle and Energy Integration Team Leader at Oxfordshire County Council in the Innovation Hub. They do love long job titles in local government. What does that actually mean? Well, a few words about the Innovation Hub first, because it is slightly unusual. There's a group of about 25 of us now, all sort of generally specialists in our own field. So there's a whole group of people looking at connected and autonomous vehicles. There's another group of people looking at health technologies. And then there's my group looking at zero emission vehicles and how that plugs into the whole energy system. And we do lots of interesting projects, largely funded by people like Innovate UK, but also we've also done things with OZEV and various other people, all aimed at trying to understand how we take the technologies coming down the line and plug them in to working for the people and businesses and visitors to Oxfordshire, and sharing that knowledge with other local authorities as well. So we've done projects on various types of charging. We've done projects looking at trying to get people's domestic energy curbside, which will probably come up again a bit later. We've done projects on catenary systems for HGVs. Fascinating subject, if anybody really wants me to bore them to death. Vehicle to grid and all of those sorts of things. Now, that has set us up in a situation where we have a group within OCC, using the shorthand for Oxfordshire, because we are a Tier 1 highways authority. So we're looking to spend a lot of that money that Dom is giving out. And we're, at the moment, jumping up and down and going, woohoo, and putting our plans together on how we do that. But we're quite unusual because we've invested in doing all of that work because, what was yesterday's innovation is today's, we've got to do it. We've got no time. And that's the important thing we need to do. So that's what we're concentrated on at the moment, is the rollout of largely AC type charging to meet the needs of people who don't have off-road parking. And there are lots of solutions. I think the thing I would say is, and I would echo, I think what Jake just said, there isn't one solution to all of this, and we've all got to work together, which also builds into something Liz said earlier, and I, as a a personal gripe. I hate coming along to conferences and hearing a supplier telling us that they've got the solution to this challenge. There isn't one solution to this challenge. We've all got to work together, and there are going to be multiple solutions. That's me done.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'm going to take a seat now because actually standing's quite difficult. So just a reminder to everybody in the audience, we do have the Slido going this afternoon. I will keep a check on things that are coming in from the Slido and direct comments to the panel as necessary. Just make sure when you do log on to Slido that you're on the #energy part, otherwise your comments will go into one of the other forums, which will not be very good for us. So it would be good now just to spend a couple of minutes just sort of understanding where we are. So I'll hand over to the panel for a quick discussion on what is the current state of play. Are we going fast enough? And what does that look like? Over to you, Dom.
Are we going fast enough? Probably not. But I do think we're almost in a bit of a, feels to me we're in a bit of a phony war at the moment. There's almost that sort of, certainly with the run-up with the area that I'm working in Levi, there's been a lot of development of the fund, but with the recent announcement of the top-down allocations of money, it feels like to me the next 2 to 3 years are going to be really, really critical in terms of driving the rollout. And just looking at the sort of numbers in terms of public charge points over the last sort of couple of years, I think there was about 10,000 rolled out last year, which if you look at where we need to get to at the target of 300,000 feels a little light. But at the same time, given the fact that sort of Levi's on its way, sort of Rapid's on its way, and the interventions that are coming, it feels like we're doing this sort of little warm-up exercise at the moment before the sort of the main event, which I'm hoping is going to be over that next 2 to 3 years. But it is going to be around how do we move from doing 10,000 to doing 30, 40,000, which is what we're going to need to do over the next sort of 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more on that. I mean, the one thing I would say around the sort of targets is I think the focus needs to be more around how many users or EV drivers can be served by the charging infrastructure that's in the ground. I think when you start to flesh out the targets to specific numbers or we get super granular with it, they almost become arbitrary. So they become less targeted, more arbitrary. So not discounting the 300,000 target, I think that's definitely one we need to be aiming for collectively as a market. But it certainly needs to be more geared around how many users can be served by that infrastructure in the ground. I think there's, it comes down to, do you want 100 chargers? And a flippant example to give. Do you want 100 chargers in the ground that could serve one charger a day, or a smaller amount that could charge 200 people a day? Again, please bear in mind that's a flippant example, but one that is very real at the minute. So just, to be considered.
Probably not as fast as we should have, but there is the other part of the equation when it comes to infrastructure, which is the availability of the electric vehicle. And let's be honest about it, they can't make enough EVs to satisfy demand at the moment. So it is a bit of a tension going on between the two at the moment about getting the infrastructure out there to meet the needs of the EVs and getting the EVs out there that can use the infrastructure. So in truth, we're probably about where we should be at the moment, but we need to rapidly accelerate because the car industry is gearing up and will start delivering the numbers that we need to see over the next 3-4 years. And that's really where we're going to start to see the change. The other major change we're going to see over the next 3-4 years is second-hand EVs in meaningful numbers coming into the market. So that will change the dynamic as well. And that will change also where we need the chargers, that going back to the postcode lottery that was mentioned earlier, because that will change quite a lot of the dynamics that are going on.
So a bit about Rapid Charging Fund and a couple of the projects in there. So in National Highways, we run 2 of them. So first one is the ESS project, which is around putting some, essentially a bit of an insurance policy, some big old batteries at motorway service areas that will support government's ambition around having 6 high-powered chargers at every motorway service area by the end of the year. We'll get there by the end of the year? No, I don't think we will, but we're giving it a good go. So that's across, that's public and private, so it's not just National Highways work. Yeah, interesting question about batteries. Well, why batteries? Why don't we just get a big new cable? Well, batteries are much quicker to install. The ones that we've procured are fully recyclable, so actually not as environmentally damaging as they can. And actually, batteries are a really good part of potentially long-term solutions because they can charge up at night when the motorway service area is empty, and then be used during the day when we all stop off for our cappuccino and our copy of the Daily Mail and read all the fronts of the newspapers. So they're a good solution. So we're doing that. That's the Electrical Storage Solutions ESS project, and we hope to get a bunch of those batteries at some of the real big priority sites in a couple by September, I think. So that's pretty quick. On rapid charging funds, so this is the big new connections at motorway service areas. We are hoping to announce a pilot pretty soon. Watch this space, spring. And we've been working pretty hard on this, actually. We've been working pretty hard with getting all of the background information that we need. So working with motorway service area operators to understand how many vehicles they think are going to be using this charging over the next sort of until 2035 and 2050. We've been working, trying to ready the electrical sector, working with each DNO, distribution network operator, and the grid to get ready, and actually also starting to talk to charge point operators as well, who are a really important part of the solution, who I failed to mention in my talk earlier. I'm so sorry.
Thanks.
But it's so we're about to announce a pilot, but actually there's a few government colleagues in here, and I don't know, I've made a career out of delivering projects in the public sector, and if you know what governance and assurance and approvals timelines are in government to get money spent, you will appreciate why it's not as quick as any of us would like. What I would say, the best time to start this work would have been 5 years ago. The second best time to start this work is today. So look, we just got to get on with it, you know. We're getting on with it.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to move to one of the questions now on the Slido, which is quite a good one, actually. It's how do we ensure that a patchwork of local initiatives amounts to a standardised national infrastructure that the consumer can rely on? And I'll go first to Paul.
There's two things really there, that more than two. The first thing to say is that OZEV have put in place a number of standards and initiatives to try and get a common approach and a common experience when using chargers. Liz said earlier in her talk before this about, she's impressed by how OZEV react to what's going on. And I have to say, that echoes my view with OZEV as well. They have been very reactive. They've taken note of what's happening in the marketplace and reacting quite speedily for government. And I don't mean that in a derogative way at all, but they have acted very speedily where there has been the need. The second thing to say is that those of us working in local authority do try and do things together as well. So a very important aspect of this, it would be the sub-transport bodies. So I work for Oxfordshire County Council, but we're part of England's Economic Heartland, EEH. And I know that there's a couple of colleagues that are also from EEH in the audience here. And we're increasingly talking about how do we make sure that we get some, consistency, and, when you cross the boundary, you aren't going to see one thing different from another. And finally, the charge point operators are beginning to standardize what they offer as a service. It's rapidly, and no pun intended by the use of that word there, moving from a market of developing people. It's beginning to standardize. It's beginning to get a maturity. There's still a way to go, but it is changing as we see. And I think, from year to year, it just gets better and better and better.
I mean, I absolutely agree with that. And it's one of those things where I think the first level of standardization that we saw come in probably 3 to 5 years ago, and what is probably largely adopted now across the CPOs, is the use of contactless payments. I mean, ultimately no one wants, like they don't want a sort of wallet full of cards. They don't want a phone full of apps. And I think that standardization is going to become more aggressive across the CPOs going forward. And I think one of the more immediate focuses, certainly from Osprey and sort of the leading CPOs in the UK currently, is the accessibility point, which I think, Liz, you mentioned in your opening talk. The problem being with that is that they're not every landlord that we work with is as receptive to such accessibility that local authorities may be, because they are directly incentivized differently. And this is the problem where we often come up against some of our key landlords, like such as developers, prop funds. They have a wealth of estate that we would love to work with them on, as would our peers. The difficulty being is that they capitalise the value of their estate, or their car parks, to be specific, by the spaces. So there's a certain value allocated to on a per spade basis often. And what that leads to is often having to pay more aggressively on ground rents, more aggressively on rental provisions, which then pushes the commercial viability into the gutter, which makes the appetite from a private sector perspective lower, if you like. Now, just to caveat all that, by the private sector appetite for the EV, as you probably be all aware, is extremely aggressive. So it's highly liquid. It's a highly liquid market, very, very bankable projects. So there's no reticence from the private sector market to come in here. However, there is an element of commercial viability that needs to be, acknowledged. And I think actually, fortunately speaking, local authorities, as I say, are highly receptive to this level of accessibility and making sure that bays are accessible, knowing full well that they are larger than the standard sort of car parking bay that we would otherwise see in a car park. But there's a long way to go.
If I can just come in as well, I think some of the things that certainly we've been thinking about as the support body for Levi are trying to sort of drive some of that collaborative behaviour. And I mentioned around the sort of local authority capability and sort of my intro. And I think a lot of that isn't around sort of people such as myself coming in and sort of advising. It's actually learning off each other is actually what a lot of the things that we're trying to encourage. So a lot of the things that we've been trying to do is bring a lot of the local authorities together and actually share a lot of the best practice. And that's both practice that's gone well, but actually often things maybe haven't gone so well. So, how do we sort of learn? How do we collectively not make the same mistakes across the different local authorities? And also, how do we sort of build some of those relationships across the local authorities so that we are getting a sort of almost a bottom-up sort of standardization, rather than sort of feeling the need to sort of go straight to the sort of more regulated model of imposing it sort of top down. I think that may come at some point, but I think actually the approach of allowing the innovation to come bottom up, I think it's actually working reasonably well at this point in time. And I think the more that we can get the sort of local authorities to collaborate across each other, the more that we're actually starting, I think we'll sort of mitigate this risk of there being a sort of patchwork of different types of approaches.
Can I come in and just make a comment on that? One of the important things about the Levi Fund is there is the capital fund and there is a capability fund. And the capability fund is to actually fund people in local authorities to do this work. And that is key and critical and more important in some ways, I think, than the capital fund. So the fact that there should be people in local authorities who can have this discussion is going to be an important aspect of what we're doing over the next 2-3 years.
Another thought for me, this comes down to customer service and the customer experience. I know obviously it does, but it does. If this is to be seamless, it needs to be seamless to the customer. And I talk a lot about needing really good collaboration in the tech sector for a reason. For a customer, what we're looking at is that having that certainty that they can plan their journey wherever they're going, whether they're going on our beautiful SRN, some A roads, some country lanes, that actually they can get where they need to get, understanding where they can charge, how much it's going to cost, and how long it's going to take them to charge. So there is a big opportunity here for the likes of our tech colleagues in the next room, hope someone's listening, to actually really have a look at some of the information that's going to be open sourced coming out of charge points and work out how to exploit that to make the best version of software to help us all that could be. We've got ZapMap at the moment. Love a bit of ZapMap, but actually it's a little bit, it's a little bit older. there's the potential to do something really good for customer experience so that it really does feel seamless.
Yeah, and just to add to that, because I think that is a great point, because I think there's the quantity versus quality issue as well. We're held to targets, quite rightly. There's a necessity for them to be hit. But the problem is, and I think with you'll notice that a lot of the sort of leading CPOs in the UK, they are starting to angle their proposition around quality. So they will start to pull away from deals. They will start to, their appetite for going into these new sites, portfolio deals across the country will start to rescind as we start to see landlords and the likes, mandate that we have to deliver a certain standard of delivery. And what I mean by that is that if we were to say we need a certain amount of space for accessible bays, and we had a limited number of spaces, Osprey and our sort of peers at the moment are starting to U-turn on that because the reputational damage is so severe. And at the end of the day, if to be quite candid and crude about it, if people aren't using our chargers and our utilization data is showing a negative impact, then, well, one, my head's on the block, so that's not great. But two, the market's going one way and that is south.
Thanks, everyone. Can we take a couple of minutes just to, I'm hearing a lot about collaborations and everybody working together and, opportunities and stuff, but let's try and explore what are the other enablers that we need in order to get ourselves to a suitable infrastructure rollout program and a suitable infrastructure in place by 2030. Over to you, Dom.
Oh, probably lots of different enablers. I think one of the sort of concerns for me around going fast enough goes back to, I think, one of the points that Liz, you just made around sort of governance. And, we can talk about the technology, we can talk about all the other elements of it, but actually I think there's probably some real basic stuff that I think if we could get right and do quicker would make an absolutely huge difference. And I think particularly on the sort of local side, you've got governance around OZEV at a sort of ministerial level, which we've got to sort of work through in terms of releasing funds. But then as we distribute the money to the local authorities, then you're also into the sort of local politics of this as well, in terms of them getting the approval. And I think if you actually sort of plot out the sort of overall level of approval, and that's before you get into planning and consents and all the other things that we kind of spoke about, right? So you've got, there's an awful lot of governance built into any of the rollout that we want to do. And I just feel if we want to go quicker, being able to sort of expedite that governance could be a real quick win of how we sort of look at it and how do we sort of streamline the process so that that doesn't become the blocker. Actually, how quickly we can get the technology out there and how quickly we can put the kit out there should be the blocker. And I often feel that isn't necessarily the case. It's the wraparounds that we could just simplify and make much, much easier. And I think if we could solve some of those issues, or at least take a significant amount of time out of that, we could actually get this whole process moving much, much faster.
Yeah, on that point, exactly. So I certainly have noticed over the last 6 months, 12 months particularly, but certainly 6 months, that there has become a more standard level of provision, certainly. So, I know back sort of 24 months ago, the big issue was around lease terms. It still is largely, so CPOs like Osprey will require a longer lease term, and that sometimes isn't palatable to a lot of landlords that are across the UK. But that is starting to happen. But one thing I couldn't agree with you more on, Dom, is the fact that needs to happen more urgently than it is currently. So, yeah.
I don't think we should let Chris sit here asking us questions without giving him a bit of this challenge. Chris, so genuinely, there's a lot of money for lawyers in this. Can you help us sort out the planning system? Like, how on earth am I going to get my cables across loads of landlords' land and into motorway service areas? Planning law doesn't support this.
No,
can you help?
I'm not a specialist planning lawyer. I did say at the start I'm a transport lawyer. I've got some real estate colleagues in the room that could, I'm sure, help. But yeah, there are a lot of problems. And whenever you touch land and different people's land, then you've got a lot of different people with a lot of different interests in the same place. And it is not going to be easy getting all those people to align. But I think if we go down the collaboration route, and it becomes part of our collective zeitgeist in that we need to all help and do things to get these things to happen, to move towards a common goal of net zero, then I think things will start to become more simplified in future.
You've not met my relatives, the landowners. Collaboration and landowner often
don't mix.
not so much. But I think the point is, you asked about enablers, and somebody asked about enablers, and actually, I talk about kind of tech enablers. I talk about regulatory enablers. So kind of helping our colleagues in whatever BASE is called this week. Apologies, I'm just not up to speed on that. But helping them think about the way the Electricity Act is implemented, so that I don't have to sit behind 58 speculative applications for capacity. But also really the planning, law, reg, protocol, framework that actually will enable some of this to be done much more quickly, because it is urgent and it does need to be done now. And we're going to have a transition period over the next 5 years where EV growth will be exponential and there just will not be the charging points. So I think, all of these enables, it's on all of us to start hustling on some of these.
It's probably
Planning law, a clear blocker then.
I mean, but it also transcends other areas as well. And part of the problem is that lots of the things that we're dealing with were written with no thought about this ever being needed. And even some of the early regulation that does mention electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging, you get to, I'm sorry to say this, Chris, get two lawyers together and they'll come up with two entirely different interpretations of what that legal framework is saying. It is difficult at times just to get a clear mandate. And I'm talking here about internally when we're doing things in the local authority. We go to one lawyer and they say, yeah, you can do that. And you go to another lawyer and they go, no, I'm not sure why they said you could do that. You can't do that. And it's one of the frustrations of not having clearly defined rules that we can operate with. And they will come, but it will take time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll move on to one of the other questions now then from the panel. So another one that's come up on the Slido is how important are behavioural science nudges to help people get over their range anxiety, which is also charging anxiety or whatever anxiety they might have between ditching their petrol vehicle and moving over to a pure EV. Who wants to start us off?
Oh, go on then. You'll know an awful lot more about this than me, but I speak as somebody that hates change. There's an irony there. I've delivered change my whole career. I hate change. I'm a who moved my cheese person. Yeah, that ages me as well. But massively important, actually. And it's we not only need to be doing charging, we need to be seen to be providing charging as well. And it is massively important. The transport focus studies on this show that actually people get confused in motorway service area car parks. They can't find the charge points. Who knew that was a thing, right? So signage and information is massively important in building confidence. We need to be talking about it. We need to be explaining how it's easy. We need to have kind of role models with their electric cars. We need to be showing people that this is a viable alternative and that actually, people can get around with electric vehicles. Because I think there's a lot of folk, even folk that we've heard from today in really prominent positions who are carrying on buying petrol engine cars and diesel engine cars. Yeah. So I think it's massively important. We need to do more. Yeah, we need to be seen to be doing more as well to help people have the confidence to make that switch.
Yeah, again, couldn't agree more. I mean, this requires an entire social shift, right? People are going to have to get used to the idea, or at least we want them to get used to the idea of going home and plugging in their car like they plug in their iPhone, or there are other phones available. But I say that literally because that is the process I go through. I rely on our public network for long journeys, for commuting, etc. And there's that necessity of an all-encompassing solution. So you have your AC chargers at the home, which charge overnight, low power demand. You plug it in like you plug in your phone or laptop or whatever else. And then you have your publicly available chargers, which require a more immediate effect. Now, what that also leads to is a position, and it comes back to the sort of the standards of accessibility and the standards which users expect. People are going to also get used to the process of planning their journeys, be that on an app, be that, however way they want to do it, via the Zap Map apps, third parties, et cetera, But what that is also leading to is a higher demand for higher profile locations. I don't think anyone in this room, I think everyone in this room will agree with me that going to a motorway service station is probably not the nicest experience in the world in terms that you wouldn't take a date there. Sorry, Liz. But
Have you been to T-Bay?
but the point being is that people are now having to dwell longer. Proportionately dwell longer, yes, but dwell longer. And because they're having to do that, they demand a higher standard. It's not a check-in, check-out like you would, for example, with a fuel pump. It is a dwell period, be that 10 minutes, be that 20 minutes, be that 30 minutes, whatever it may be. That is driving the user demand. And what we are now experiencing is that user demand and user expectation is going from a nice to have to a minimal expectation. And see, that's the sort of user sort of shift we are seeing currently. But to sort of round that was a long way around saying there is going to have to be that sort of social shift. And I think as people are being brought up on the technology, so sort of certainly younger drivers that are passing their test now, etc., this will be the norm for them, and they'll be having the same conversations with their children on new technologies, I'm sure. But right now, the mass adoption point, it inherently relies on the fact that we are going to experience that social shift over the immediate term, not the long term.
There's some basics as well, isn't there? I mean, I was having a conversation out in the foyer with someone earlier about sort of charge points and looking at some of the charging infrastructure, and their immediate point was, well, yeah, I don't have one because I live in a flat and wouldn't have anywhere to charge it. And it's that visibility of just having the charge points out there, and people have been getting that immediate comfort in their local environment that they've got somewhere to charge it. I mean, certainly for Levi, that's one of the big things of, we've got this big market failure. We've got to start showing that the kit is going to be there and build the confidence that enable people to get that comfort that if they do get one, they know where they're going to be able to charge it. They can see lots of local kit available to them and get rid of that anxiety.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that as well, I mean, the pressure on getting this right first time is inordinate, and it shouldn't be snubbed. If you go to a charging point as a first-time EV driver and it is a poor experience in whatever capacity that is, whatever user, whatever CPO, whatever it is, I guarantee that will sit with you for the rest of your journey. Not the single journey, but I mean your EV driving journey. I think that's why there is such a necessity to get it right first time across CPOs.
I don't think I've got very much to add other than to say it's a very important subject. We need to do better education of people so that they understand what are the possibilities within an electric vehicle, because so many people are switching themselves off from them because they just don't understand they could.
Thanks. We'll spend the last couple of minutes of our session then just going round the panel. And I think what I'd like to hear is, what do you think the two largest blockers are and the one biggest enabler is? Should we sum up with that? Who would like to start?
DNO capacity. Sorry. There is another. The reason I say sorry is there's another panel to talk about electrical capacity and all that kind of good stuff, and I don't want to steal their thunder. They're going to be much better at it than I am. Sitting in a queue behind 150 speculative applications. You'll notice I've upped the number since I last spoke about it, but that's the reality. Some DNOs are receiving 500 new applications a quarter. That's a blocker. I'm going to leave some of the other blockers for other colleagues. Enablers. Honestly, I think kind of the combined knowledge, experience, talent, insight of the people here. I've been hugely inspired today by talking to a bunch of people with a bunch of experience who are really committed to kind of getting this done. And the energy and enthusiasm that I've seen has kind of really shored me up for another difficult week back at in my day job. The enabler is us, but I think we just got to keep talking to each other about it.
So enabler capability, I think that's the big one, isn't it? It's like, how do we keep building the capability that we need? And I'd take that positive message. In terms of blockers, you wanted two. I'd say governance and governance would probably be my two, to be honest, that have come out of the conversation. So.
I mean, enabling not to labour the point too much, but it's collaboration. Open up the market. Let's have a candid and open and frank conversation. I think there's what we have got no time for in this market collectively. I think we can all agree on is smoke and mirrors. We haven't got time to make the mistakes here. We need to get from A to B as swiftly as possible, and the only way we're going to do that is collaboration. And blockers, I would say, taxes and targets. So I'll take a user position as well as a sort of market position here. So user position. We'll all be well versed on the VAT rates between 5% and 20%. That needs to shift. We need to see a blanket tax rate, in our view, apply to user tariffs to ensure that there is an equitability and an equality on charging infrastructure. It's discouraging the likes of people who live in flats and people who haven't got off-street parking, and that is slowing the demand rate for EV drivers. And I think targets, we can focus on targets all we want. However, again, to err back on the point that I made right at the beginning of this panel talk, if what we need to do is ensure that we are focusing our efforts on the number of people, the number of EV drivers that can be served by the infrastructure in the ground. To give a facetious example, be that 1 or 1 million, it is not about the number of sockets that are in the ground, more so about whether them sockets and the portion of those sockets can serve the demand profile that we're seeing in the UK at the minute. So they're my 2 points.
I'll start with the enabler. From where I'm sat, the big enabler at the moment is the Levi Fund. It really has unlocked us as local authorities to be able to make the next big step forward. So that's great. The blockers, well, I'm not allowed to mention energy supply because Chris doesn't want us to, but it is a significant issue. Taking the Levi Fund, which is great, does possibly give us a couple of other blockers, and that is there is going to be a huge demand out there amongst local authorities for people who do actually understand what's going on, because you are going to need that. So whilst you've got the capability fund, where are the people to do that? And we've got to be aware of that, and we've got to be careful about that. And similarly, at the same time, there is going to be an awful lot of work for the charge point operators to do, and there's the capacity constraint there. And again, we've got to be careful about how we handle that, because we could end up causing bigger problems than we set out to do.
And finally, yes, no answer. Will we get there by 2030? Will we have enough chargers in place to meet the demand at that time? Dom?
Yes, we will.
Yes.
Subject to energy supply, yes.
Maybe.
2 yeses, 1 caveat and 1 maybe. I think that's a pretty good solution. Thank you very much for joining the session.